Not so much tonight. I'm really good at answering any questions you might have on what's going on Silver Creek. When I started guiding on it, I realized that it wasn't just that I wanted to fish on it, show people how to fish on it. I wanted to protect it because I fell in love with the fact that I hated it. And so, that being said, I started out with the Nature Conservancy, doing a lot of data collection on it, working with Ecosystem Sciences on putting out annual reports. There's a bunch of them out there that you guys can take as many as you want. And we expanded the data collection to include temperature, dissolved oxygen, silt inventory, restoration projects, working with the water, the agriculture, and as it started to grow, I developed a website called the Save Silver Creek website, which became a repository for all the data on Silver Creek. So if you geek out on the data on the creek, that's the best place to go to get all the information. And so how many people here have fished Silver Creek for over 30 years? Well, then there's quite a few of you that know that it's changed, and it's going to change more, especially as we go into climate change, water issues, growth in the valley, and staying on top of it, like you do with the Big Wood and everything else around here, is critical if we want to keep that fishery. We are lucky that Silver Creek, being a spring creek, is somewhat manageable. As far as the water, as long as we can, stay on top of it. So I did pardon the fact that some of this presentation, my graphic skills are not the greatest. Okay, a little bit of history. I'm gonna start out with some trivia here. If you guys know some of this, great. If you have any questions, just let me know. Silver Creek was formed from several glacial events that were over a millennia, and the most eventful ones that happened were glaciers that came down through the valley and then ended up coming down against the Timmerman Hills, which is really why Silver Creek is formed. And then once Silver Creek the glaciers backed back out of the valley, the original Big Wood River flowed down where Silver Creek is right now. And then there was a volcanic eruption down by where the Suzy Q is that ended up blocking off Silver Creek and formed a lake. And there were several lakes that went back and forth over time. Big Wood got pushed over on this side. And then another volcanic event happened over here by where Stanton Crossing is. That blocked off the Big Wood here for a little bit, and then Silver Creek ended up forming out there where it is today. And then you have what you have right now, where after a couple more of these events, Silver Creek went out where it is now, and the Big Wood ended up down through where it is today. Now, Silver Creek, when it backed out and ended up depositing a whole bunch of gravels and clay and everything else that happens when glaciers back out, it formed something that was really unique for Silver Creek, and that's a triple aquifer. Up against the Timmerman Hills, you have a low confining layer that they believe is up to about 900 feet deep. And if you were to have a drop of water go down into that layer, they say it'll take anywhere between 50 to 75 years to get pushed back up and out. And then there was another confining layer. This lower confining layer goes from the Timmerman Hills up to about Highway 20. And then the next one lays over the top of it, over clay and other sediments, that goes from the Timmerman Hills up to probably about halfway up to Bellevue. And then the unconfined layer, this one here, drop of water takes anywhere between about 5 and 25 years to go through. And then the next unconfined layer flows through over the top of all of these, and it takes a drop of water anywhere between about 30 days to about 180 days to flow out over it. And the reason Silver Creek works as it does is that these two layers, when they're full, you get artesian wells that work through these that bubble up through this confined layer and then push the springs up. And this is where Silver Creek can get in trouble, is that when these confining layers end up getting drained out, which we've been seeing a lot of while we have all the water problems in this area now, this unconfined layer will start to dry up. And as it does, you lose the pressure from the springs that come up and then start to form Silver Creek. So then that's one reason you see a lot of fluctuations in the flows when we get drought, especially if we get 2 or 3 years of straight drought. These layers will start to drop out, and then you start to lose the pressure that pushes the water up into the springs. Any questions?
No.
Come on, give me questions.
Because it's the draw on the deeper confined layers.
One is that you won't get the unconfined layer that will drop down in and fill them up, and the other one is from extraction. So if you have agriculture, and mostly agriculture, then what will happen is that they'll pump down into these layers in here, start to draw them down, and then you don't have any pressure coming up into the unconfined layer that goes into the springs.
Do you know what the deepest wells are down there?
The deepest one that I've seen is about 320 feet. And that's, the deeper ones end up really close to the Timmerman Hills. And so that's where the deepest pockets are. And if these are all full, and I've seen this happen several times, is that you'll go to some of these wells and they'll be pumping, they'll just gush water out.
And is the middle layer, you said gets up as high as Bellevue, almost as high as Bellevue. Does it basically fill up the whole triangle?
Not really. If you think of the Timmerman Hills, you know, the whole aquifer system's this deep, it just kind of tapers off as it comes up towards Bellevue. But then also you have, you know, a lot of people think of aquifer as a big pool underneath your feet, and a lot of them aren't. This one has so many layers of basalt, clay, gravels, and fluvial sediments that it's just kind of like it's hard to describe, because if you were to drill a hole over there, you could probably find water that would come up in 5 feet, and you go over here, it may take you 100 feet, because it's just really mixed up. The whole geology of the aquifer system is like somebody threw a cake batter into a cake pan and never mixed it. It's just really, really, really mixed up. That's one reason that it's so confusing and difficult to try and figure out how it works, is that you just end up with, you can, for instance, if you have recharge in an area, and I've seen this where you can put a recharge pit in a spot that will recharge a spring within 30 days. And then you can have a recharge spot over here that will take 4 months to recharge a spring in that area, just because it's so unconnected in some areas.
So the diagram really doesn't represent what the aquifer looks like, right? This is a characterization.
Yeah, exactly.
So I understand that. So what does 320 feet look like in this diagram? Roughly?
Well,
Is it
320
middle, or-
feet.
Oh, it's all the way down.
Yeah, all the way down. So it'd be like somebody would punch a hole down through here and they would miss,
Right. They
Some
miss
of
the
these-
first two and get to
and then end up down at the bottom one.
Yeah.
Any other questions on that one? So that's kind of how the makeup of Silver Creek works. And the only reason that Silver Creek is a spring creek is because of Timmerman Hills. It's the Timmerman Hills were not there, all the water would just flow out. And so that's the reason it's there. Okay, another piece of trivia. These are the native fish of Silver Creek, in case anybody was unsure of what some of them are. These are the original fish that were in Silver Creek. One that's really worth noting is this one here. Is the whitefish disappeared about 1991. That was the last time that Fish and Game pulled one out during a shocking survey. The last time I ever caught one was probably right around the same time. When I moved here and started fishing, half the fish in Silver Creek were whitefish. And the whitefish would come up and eat trico with the rainbows. And it was incredible. They were everywhere in there. the original rainbow in here, and there's some speculation on this one, but now we're starting to learn that probably original rainbow was the same desert red band that is in the Big Wood, which stands to reason that, during the millennia of glacial events and everything else that happened, that the red band is probably the very original fish that was in there. And then, of course, the bridge lip suckers, I found out when I put this together, there's actually two of them. And I never knew that there was two different types of bridge lip sucker in there. And of course, long nose dace, we all know about those, the wood river sculpin. And then these are the non-natives. This guy here started showing up probably, in Silver Creek. I started seeing him creeping around the Suzy Q early 90s, and then they just they kept moving up. They were originally introduced in Littlewood, and it was speculated that when Jack Hemingway was director of Fish and Game, he put them in the desert to see how they would do, and of course we all know they did really well. And then the Western Slope cutthroat, this was new to me too, was that it never was on this side of Galena. It was an introduced fish and stocked in the area. So some of the fish that you catch now on the Big Wood or in Silver Creek and south of Galena will have some of that cutthroat look to them. They'll have the slashes under the gills. And so they believe that, they came in and intermixed with them too. And then the brook trout, I still see a couple once in a while in the upper tributaries, because twice a year I go out and download all of the temperature information on every piece of property that Silver Creek runs through. Twice a year I'll go out and get that information. And once in a while I'll see these guys in the upper tributaries, but for the most part, they're not around much anymore. And Fish and Game is glad they're not. It's probably a good thing they're not. The rainbows that are in here, and this was something a Fish and Game pulled out for me. I asked them what all, as far as rainbows, were in Silver Creek when they put the hatchery in. And it's a mixed bag. I mean, they took rainbows that were native from the Big Wood and Silver Creek. They brought rainbows in from the West Coast, and they just mixed them all up. And so now genetically, the rainbows in the area are kind of just a little bit of everything. So they really liked playing with their new toy at Haysburg. And so that was, I found that to be kind of interesting that, they couldn't really give me a straight answer as to exactly what the strains were. I always thought they were McLeod rainbows mixed in with the red band, but they played with everything. Any questions on that one?
When they do the electroshock, do they do a genetic test on the fish they sample?
This year we did, and I helped out on that a little bit in an area I'll show you in a minute above a barrier on Loving Creek that they did the genetic sampling here, and then they found that there were pure strains of red band that were in the area. So we went down into Silver Creek so we could find the same markers that were in them, and there are some. As far as finding any true red band that are in there, I'm not 100% sure. Amanda, you might be able to answer this. When they did the sampling on the Big Wood, did they sample above the waterfall on Trail Creek?
Yes, and they found that the red band were pretty intact above the waterfall.
That was my understanding too, is that they really wanted to target that particular spot because they'd done no stocking, and they figured that if they were going to find something.
And fish can't get up there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that was where they kind of, I think, concluded that the original fish in here were a genetically different strain of red band than anywhere else on the planet. Same thing with the Big Wood, or the Wood River sculpin, is that they were totally isolated in a new species of red band. Kind of not unlike Copper Basin, where you had that whitefish. That whitefish was found nowhere else in the world. Everybody thinks a whitefish is whitefish, but that one's different.
I was curious on the native fish. Is the whitefish the only one that's gone completely?
Yes.
of the 6?
Of the 6. And has there been any interest, would they be able to be reintroduced?
What, to feed more browns? Yeah, I mean, it's no secret my view on the brown trout in Silver Creek. I am not a particular fan of them because when they get over about 21 or 22 inches, they won't take dry flies. The little ones, the tricos and everything else, like the rainbow will. A rainbow would eat tricos until it's 50 pounds. They're just that stupid. But the brown trout, they would just soon sit underneath the rainbows while they're eating the trico and eat the rainbows. So they came from Germany. They're a more evolved fish. But I would love to see the whitefish back in there, but get rid of the browns, and that's not going to happen. And the only thing we can do to bring more rainbows in the system. I mean, one of my goals was always, when I started, with the Alliance and helped form it, was that I wanted to see rainbows year-round at the Suzy-Q again. I have not seen rainbows year-round at Suzy-Q for 20 years, and that's mostly due to habitat. So if you want more of these guys in there, the wild fish, you got to change the habitat, a little more suitable to them, but you're always going to end up having the browns. And I love browns. I'm just not a big fan of them in Silver Creek because of the way that the trout interact with the hatches. So that being said, yeah, if whitefish came back, how many of you would actually just want to take the whitefish and throw them back up on the bank? We used to do that all the time, but now we know better that this is an indicator right here. I mean, that's a very, very important fish, along with this one on the big one.
Yeah.
You start losing those, you got a problem. So anyway, bad guy. Okay, this is Hayspur Hatchery in 46. It was built a really long time ago, way before then, but I thought I'd just throw that in there so you could see that Butte Creek starts right here. It's a fairly sizable spring, and then it flows out through this area right in here. And that's kind of what the hatchery looked like, a long time ago. It's a little bit different right now. Gavers Lagoon was probably a little bigger in here with this marsh area. And then this I'm going to get into a little bit more with the restoration, but that's just kind of thrown in there. It's an old photo. Okay, now some of you guys, I've been asked this last survey that Fish and Game did this year. This is what they found. They do it every 3 years. Total trout, now they did a transect in Stalker Creek, and they always do the same transects, the same sections, so that they, can compare apples to apples. They found 1,913 fish total, and then the density of fish they figured was about the same per mile. And then the percentage of browns was 59% rainbow, 41, and I think a lot of that was because once they got down to the willows, they bumped way up. Also, Stalker Creek has more browns in it than rainbows. For whatever reason, I'm not 100% sure, but they do prefer Stalker Creek. So anyway, that was the percentages they had. And then it was, people asked me too when they did the survey, why was there no fish in the Nature Conservancy? Because this year we saw that up until about July or so, that there was hardly any fish in the Conservancy, the main stem of the Conservancy. And so a lot of them had pushed up into Stalker Creek. And a big reason for that is that the weed growth was way down and the hatches were way down. So the fish follow the hatches, and they will usually follow the weed growth because the weed growth is refuge for the fish. And that was a big reason that they just weren't, they found almost no fish in the Conservancy to speak of. And then of course, once the trico starts coming along and the weeds come up, then the fish start to fill in quite a bit in the Conservancy. Mortality rates. This was really interesting in the fact that last year people were asking me, no fish in the creek, where'd they all go? We had a high mortality last year. in the winter especially, because the creek froze in a lot of places across the bank. Even though it's a spring creek, it still did freeze, and the winter killed off quite a few fish. Then also Fish and Game believes that pelicans were a big part of why they disappeared. Plus, you had previous 2 years of drought, which squeezes the spawning area for the fish. So you lose water in the springs, you lose quantity of water in those springs, you lose the depth of the water, you lose the spawning, you lose the spawning potential of the fish. So the next couple of years, you have a downturn. That's just the way that it is that it's very cyclic. And, you know, until you change the habitat, keep the water stable, you're going to get those cycles quite a bit. And Fish and Game believes that as far as long-term, it's still a stable fishery, and I agree with that 100%. It's just that, you know, to keep it more stable, it's going to take some work. This guy, that is only the second tiger trout I've ever seen in Silver Creek. Have any of you guys ever caught one in the creek? Okay, a remnant of a brook trout somewhere way up wherever met up with a brown trout. And so that's what you end up with. I've seen one other one besides this one. And once they do breed, they're sterile. They cannot reproduce after they get within what could be a spawning size. So it's pretty rare to come across any of those. And I was really surprised to have seen one when we did the shocking. And we put a tag in that one, and it got caught again 4 months later, and it had moved from, this came out of Point of Rocks, and it moved up into the Double R in about 6 months.
How far is that?
It's river miles, what, about 4?
And I have another question. How big is the transect?
Well, the transect, don't think of it as across the stream, it's the length of the stream, so that could be, I think the one in the Willows, they started by putting the boats in right around Silver Creek West, and then they take out Point of Rocks. Stalker Creek was from the bridge at TNC, and then they went all the way through TNC with it.
It's a variable distance.
Pretty
Depends
much.
on what that is.
Yeah. And then, but then they do that every 3 years in the same area. And Fish and Game is thinking about changing when they shock to a different time of the year so they get a better representation of what happens when the weeds are up and the fish are more dispersed rather than just being kind of in a couple areas. And then, of course, the Willows area, they found almost all browns that were down there. Any other questions on that one?
How do you think these numbers relate to the double R?
The Double R has the most stable density of fish throughout the year anywhere in the creek. And it's due for a couple of reasons. One is the restoration that has gone on down there. All the water of the creek is consolidated, you know, from Levin Creek down. And so, you know, I'd say that probably, I'd have to say that the Conservancy area, even though the fish move around a lot, has more fish, but more of them are juvenile fish. And I think that they do move around in that section, in that area quite a bit, because they have the tributaries to go all the way up into. A lot of the fish in the Double R just don't even want to go through the dam. They do, but they will just stay in that Double R area. And there is spawning area down there. So I think the Double R probably has the most stable populations of fish. And it is mostly because of the restoration on it. Any other questions on that one? Oh, come on now. I need the questions, I really do. I'll burn through this in a hurry. All right. On everybody's mind. Pelicans, I didn't start seeing them until maybe 10 years ago. I thought maybe since they were a protected species, that they just happened to come across Silver Creek for the most part, found that they really liked feeding in Silver Creek. And then Fish and Game, of course, we all started complaining about the pelicans hammering a fish, and boy, were they. One of these guys will eat 5 pounds of fish a day. And you throw 50 pelicans on the creek for 6 weeks, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that they're going to cause some damage. So Fish and Game came in and they brought in U.S. Fish and Wildlife to start hazing them, along with a lot of the local ranch managers. And so they it's been successful. And Fish and Game, you know, there's several reasons they think that the pelicans have gone down in their hunting populations recently. And when they started learning more about where they were, the colony that comes over here is from Walcott Reservoir. So they started targeting Walcott Reservoir for finding out what was going on. They did some radio telemetry work on it where they would put the radio tags in trout and then track where the pelicans were taking them. And then that's how they found out they were coming from Walcott Reservoir. They go over there and walk around through the colonies and find the radio tags were in there. And so overall, the pelican population had been increasing until the last couple of years. And some of the reasons that we believe the populations have gone down a little bit, some avian flu on the birds, and then also the fluctuations of water quantity in Silver Creek. It seems like the pelicans like it a little bit more when the flows are lower. When the flows get up a little bit, they have a harder time getting at the fish. U.S. Fish and Wildlife plans on hazing again this year. I don't know how much more they'll do beyond that. I've watched them do it, and they don't like it. And then the pelicans, of course, you'll see them right around kind of opening day a little bit, and then they start to disappear because they hate people. So obvious reasons. But anyway, they seem to be on the decline for Silver Creek, and that is a good thing because they really do a lot of damage. Any questions on that one? Oh,
Greg, they'll fly over from Walmart in a day too.
oh yeah, yeah. And one thing that was really interesting too, you know that down on Highway 93 where Silver Creek goes under it, there's those big wetlands out there. They'll go and roost out there overnight sometimes, and then they'll come back into the creek, and then they'll head over to Walcott.
Where's Walcott?
It's east of here, what, about 100 miles, somewhere in there. It's a big wildlife refuge area for birds, and Walcott has some big rainbows in it, but it's mostly carp and some sunfish and stuff like that in there. But and then, you know, if you talk to people that fish a lot over in the Henry's Fork area too, they're a problem over there.
Is there any problem for river otters in that area?
Yes, a little, but I've seen the river otters interact in Silver Creek with the fish, and I have nothing against them. I mean, they'll do some damage, but what's funny thing about otters, and you ask any landowner that has a pond on his property, that they'll come in and wipe out a pond, and then they'll leave. And then they may come back 10 or 15 years later. They move a lot. I've been told an otter will travel 10 miles overland in a day just to get to another spot in order to fish it. And then they'll wipe it out and leave it alone, and then come back when it's full of fish again. There's a funny story I'll never forget. Any of you guys remember when Guy Boniver was the preserve manager? Okay, when they used to do the banquet up here in Sun Valley, and we'd all had a few beers, and I went up to Guy, and because I'd noticed an otter that was in Sullivan's, and this thing looked like a seal. It was huge. And I asked Guy, I said, "What do you seen that otter in there?" "Oh, we've seen that otter in there." And then about 2 or 3 weeks later, I noticed the otter wasn't around. And I went up to Guy at another function and I said, Guy, what happened to that otter? He goes, you had the beer? So yes, they are around. I also help manage the Suzy-Q, and they do get down in there quite a bit, but they do move. And they're just part of it. I don't have much of a hate relationship with otters as I do pelicans, because they've been here forever and ever and ever. And I kind of like seeing them. They're allowed to get a few fish here and there. Okay, some of the things that I do with the Alliance is not only just with restoration and doing the monitoring and everything else that we do with it, is that we found this guy in the creek, about 10 years ago, and everybody was, oh, that's a beautiful plant. Where'd that come from? Then it started to really move around a lot in Silver Creek. And the problem with the yellow flag iris is that, one, it's extremely invasive. It's from Asia. And we decided that, well, we better see what we can do with this plant because it competes directly with the cattails. And I don't know if you guys are aware of this or not, but cattails are vital to a wetland or a spring creek. You got to have them. They're the lungs of the system. They really help filter out pollutants. And these get in directly with the cattails and choke them out. And if you go over to Lane Ranch, you see this all around the ponds that are in there. And for God only knows what reason, the landscapers decided that this is a beautiful flowering plant to put along the ponds. We figured about 30 years ago, we had some seeds that got into Sullivan's Pond. Nobody really noticed them too much. And Lou Lunte and I started talking about it, and he said that when he built the cabin and he was preserve manager down there for a while, he noticed it. And these plants, they start out in a clump, and then they grow out like this, and they spread out into a big wide circle. Everything in there is dead. There's nothing that grows inside that circle, so they just choke everything out. And so we decided we better find out where it's coming from and what's going on with it. We realized that Sullivan's Pond was the epicenter of it, where it started, and that this thing had been in there for 30 years, that nobody noticed it. And what happens is that as you get high water years, the seed floats, and the seed will float with the wind, and it'll typically go to the windward side of the stream, and it particularly likes disturbed soils and disturbed areas. So areas that we've been doing restoration in, it's getting a lot of this. And so we started to notice that it was everywhere. So Steve Polson from Living Earth and I took my canoe and floated down the creek and started treating it and marking where all these plants were. First time we went out, it took us 3 days. We found over 2,500 plants, just colonies of plants. We were shocked. And they were all the way from Sullivan's Pond clear down to Highway 93 past Suzy-Q. But we were fortunate in the fact that as we moved down through the system, found less and less and less and less. So we knew we might be able to get a grip on it. So since we started doing this 5 years ago, last year we found 50 plants. So we've got a handle on this one, which is really nice. So that's a success story on an invasive species in Silver Creek.
What's the treatment?
Steve Polson could answer that for you, but it doesn't hurt anything under the water column, but it'll kill everything above it. And so you get in, and you might have to treat it a couple times to get it to take hold and get rid of it. So you spot treat it. So I'd take the canoe down, he'd walk one bank, I'd park the canoe, I'd walk the other bank. It's labor intensive. And so we'd spray everywhere we get it, and you have to get out there right around the end of June when it flowers, so you're not spraying the plants you don't want to spray. You could also cut, if you guys see this, okay, and you see some of these plants, cut the flower off and put it in a Ziploc or put it in something and then just throw it away. We're very fortunate that it is a seed that's very difficult to carry around on your boots or anything. It's not picked up by birds very easy. So it's pretty much just spread within the water when the conditions are right. And so if you happen to see them, don't hesitate to let me know, or just cut the tops off. And I don't know, when you guys go into the Conservancy and you cross the boardwalk at the bottom of Sullivan's where the water came out, this stuff was everywhere in there. I mean, it was the predominant plant that was in there when we first started getting into it. And now you might be hard pressed to find it. So this one was a particularly bad one. The other one we're keeping an eye on too is the purple loosestrife. That one is all over in southern Idaho, and that can be a really bad plant. It grows about this tall. You guys know what it is? Have you seen it? It's real pretty. It's got purple flowers on it. It can get about this tall. And if you happen to see it, same thing, cut it down and get it out. I've only seen one plant in Silver Creek at Kilpatrick Bridge. And we figured it was probably somebody that had come from the Snake River area, had some of the seeds on their boot or whatever, and then got in and then it started to grow, but we were able to get it out. So we're keeping a real close eye on that one. Because if purple loosestrife gets into the system, it could be devastating. And it's a hard one to get out. And so we are always trying to keep an eye on it.
How many plants are in the right hand? Is that, I can see there's a lot of flowers, but is that a couple of colonies or is that one colony? Or?
It's a shitload.
It's a shitload.
I'd have to say
that's a technical description.
That's a technical description, and this is not uncommon to what we've been seeing on some of the banks in the creek, where you would literally see the plant from here to the wall growing in one big colony. Mm-hmm. So they will connect up. They have the same tubular root system as the cattail, so you can't pull them out. You can't burn them out. You can't, the only way is to chemically treat the darn thing and then get after it again the next year. And then if you get 2 or 3 years running where you've treated it, then you're going to get rid of it. Then the cattails can have a chance to come back in. But left unchecked, I would say 20 years from now, that'd be the predominant plant in the wetland. You go look at Lane Ranch in July and see what it looks like with this. We've been trying to get the landscapers on board to, not have this on their list of plants to put in the area. And unfortunately, it won't go upstream. It can only go downstream with the current.
That's interesting.
Okay, restoration. I put this map together a while back, and it's on the Save Silver Creek site. On the Save Silver Creek site, there's a big KML file. If we got time, I'll show you it, but it has all the data for Silver Creek. You just put it in Google Earth and you can see everything. These restoration projects started out quite a while ago. One of the first ones was Butte Creek by the hatchery, right in there. That one's going to get redone. Then there was the Renegade that got done down here. Overall, there's been probably 50-ish restoration projects that have been done in Silver Creek, which is shocking to me. I had no idea there was that many. All the ones that are in green here are the ones that have been done. The ones here in red are the proposed ones. And these little sections in blue are the only sections in Silver Creek that we believe to be about as pristine as what Silver Creek might have looked like 200 years ago. That's left in there. So we don't have a ton left that we can really model from, but one of them is probably the Suzy Q area in there. It's pretty much left, the way it would have been forever because it hasn't any grazing or had any agriculture on it. The willows. You guys have all seen, the willow section. That's some of the most pristine portion of Silver Creek there is. It's got the right velocities, it's got the right riparian area, the gravels, and everything is the right mix for Silver Creek to work right. The other one is Stalker Creek, down from where the bridge is on the Conservancy down to where it connects up with Grove Creek. That area in there is pretty much the way it should be, except it doesn't have as many meanders as we'd like to see. So there's been a lot of restoration. And then the KML file, if you click on any one of these, you can see the information on when the restoration project was put in, what its target was, and how it met that target as far as restoration. Come on, questions? Come on. Okay, a lot of people have been asking about Stalker Creek. What's going on with it? And the Nature Conservancy has taken on doing restoration work on Stalker Creek for several reasons. One is that it's their philanthropy water. You have to have money in order to do restoration on Silver Creek. A lot of people that spend money with the Nature Conservancy, as you guys know, that they'll let them come in and fish this area in here. And if you fished it, 40 years ago, or you fished it recently, it's nothing like it used to be. In the last 5 years, that area has degraded so much that there's hardly any fish in there except for very large fish that you can only catch when it's windy. And so it was in dire need of some restoration. And so the Nature Conservancy, with Erica Phillips leading the charge, got grant money to do it, and then came in, and this is what it looks like now. This is a pretty recent Google Earth photo where they came in. Here's the culvert. Here's the Cheney Creek Ranch up here. This is all different through here. They took the big pond and split it into 3 ponds here. And they've come in and then re-meandered this with some pockets and pools, and these backwater estuaries that are right in here and right in here. These are absolutely critical to Silver Creek. Those backwater estuaries hold your juvenile fish. When the fish in Silver Creek spawn, it's kind of funny. It's a little bit different than a freestone, because a freestone really thrives on the woody debris and the structure that's in there to hold the juvenile fish and for refuge for fish. Silver Creek is all about, they spawn, little guys come out of the egg and they run for here. The water's this deep, and they can handle water up to about 85 degrees. So they don't get predated on very much at all in there. Then once the weed growth comes up in Silver Creek, they get to about that long, and they head straight out for the weeds in Silver Creek. And then they'll live in the weeds until they're about that long, and then they venture out. And then that's the way that they cycle in Silver Creek for getting refuge, food, and everything else that they need, is that they absolutely have to have these little backwater estuaries. And those wetlands are designed so they'll be this deep to when the water's, when the creek is full, they'll be pretty shallow, and that gives them great refuge. And the key to these is to not have them connected up at the top ends, because if they're connected at the top end, then you get the water flowing through it and warms up and it comes out, and you got a problem. So they're all connected at the bottom, where they can come in and out that way. So that's, in restoration world on Silver Creek, those are absolutely fundamental that you have those in the system.
Right. When they started that project, we worked with Fish and Game, our chapter, and we took our fish rescue tank down there, and they had a tank. We electroshocked that whole section. There were 30 fish.
I know.
It was
It's depressing.
And Bruce, you were there. And, yeah.
When you look at this, this through here was so over widened, and there was about that much sediment and then about that much water over it. And then that, of course, in Silver Creek is a death sentence to the fishery, because it warms the water up, you lose your plant diversity, you lose your insect diversity, you lose your spawning gravels. So in restoration world on Silver Creek, getting rid of this is absolutely key. And then you see that, then
What caused that? Was it cattle or what?
it's multi-factor. Everybody says that cows, big problem in Silver Creek. Yes, they were. They get along banks, they over-widen it, slough the sediment into it, and then you get mostly the over-widening for the cattle. Now it's agriculture. You get a lot of barley. When they till it in the spring or in the fall, and you get snow on it and you get rain on it, it flushes the muddy water in the creek. So right now we're really working hard on buffer zones for the creek. A lot of these fields have pinch points that can be this wide, where you'll have 200 acres worth of water and mud coming into a spot like this. It goes straight in the creek, and it can happen in 48 hours. And you don't even know it. And then all of a sudden you got your creek filled up with mud again. I've been seeing this on some of the tributaries. And so all you need to do is to create a 1/4 acre buffer zone, a wetland, or a berm that cuts off that pinch point and direct it down into another area of a buffer zone. So they're very critical. So now we took the 4-legged cows out, but then we also have another problem, the 2-legged cows. In a perfect world, we would not be allowed to wade Silver Creek, because what we're doing, and this is very evident in the pond, is they came in and they dredged out the pond, cut a swath down the middle of it, and then we got in there, float tubed it, and sloughed all that sediment that was left around the edges back into it. So where's it go? Into the low spots. So we are a lot to blame, fishing Silver Creek, for moving sediment around. We're not putting it in it when we're fishing it, we're just moving it around. And so trying to manage that, is very critical. But agriculture now is the big target. You could have, let's say, a field like this, and it looks perfectly flat. But then here it is, and it might come right through in here in a low spot. And if this had snow on it and rained on it, then you got a real issue. One story I'll share with you was, you guys remember that flood I think we had back in 2007? Six?
2006.
It was a 500-year event. I mean, the creek went from 100 CFS to 450 CFS in 24 hours. And what happened was, and this was very evident down on John French's place, he's got that big field, and it flushed 50 years worth of mud down into it, nobody knowing it, because we had all that snow and all that rain, and it just gushed into it. So that's when it was a real wake-up call, where having some buffer zones and some wetlands to help filter that out would have been very helpful. So that's where we're getting most of the sediment now, is from agriculture. Okay, this is huge. And one of my bucket list items for Silver Creek has always been Loving Creek. Loving Creek has 1/3 of Silver Creek's water, and has 3/4 of its pollution. Some of it's a hatchery, some of it is legacy cattle. There was a dairy farm up on Bashaw's property when you go by Gannett for many, many years. You can see that old milk shed that's down on one of the springs. They used to store milk in it because it was cold, sitting over a spring, and then they'd come and pick it up and do whatever. But anyway, we decided that targeting Loving Creek was going to be a major thing for Silver Creek overall. So Erica at the Nature Conservancy started putting together a Bureau of Reclamation grant. And we were able to meet the needs of the grant for funding. The Alliance, the Conservancy, Fish and Game, and the landowners along Silver Creek all put in money to, meet that matching portion of the grant so that we could get it. I thought we were probably going to get about 1.3 million. We ended up with 1.9. And so this is huge for Silver Creek right now. We have projects that have already been done on Loving Creek that some landowners spent their own money on. And then we have some stuff that needs to be done in the upper watershed that is what we're targeting right now. And so anyway, the restoration we have going on right now is mostly from the hatchery up. And there's a little bit down, a little bit lower. I'll show you that in a minute. This fish barrier, nobody knew about it. I knew about it for a while because I had some loggers in the area that, I'd seen this. 75 years it had been sitting in there like this. There is no way fish have been going up over that forever. So you were losing out everything up above, all that spawning habitat for fish. So that was number one, was this fish barrier. And so that needed to come out. The next thing that we had problems with was this ditch right here that goes over to the hatchery. That ditch probably is at least half of Loving Creek's problem when it comes to water quality. It is filled up with sediment. It's about half the width of this room. And then as soon as it started to get warm, it was just nothing but algae. And so we were finding out dissolved oxygen, in this area. We have a dissolved oxygen logger down here, but it was going through the roof. Even though this water would come out, get diverted over the hatchery, go into Gabbers Lagoon, and mix with Butte Creek water, which is some of the coldest water in Silver Creek, it still had the worst water quality down below where Butte Creek was coming in. So this project that we have going on right now, we've already designed it, we're gonna start it this spring, is to get rid of this fish barrier, pipe this ditch back over through here to service the water right for the hatchery and to bring back into this wetland and into Gabbers Lagoon. So by piping this, we eliminate all that problem in there. And we can, water efficiency and also for the water quality. And the next thing that's happening is here, we're taking the West Fork of Loving Creek and moving it over into here, and then islands, get rid of the sediment, deeper water, and then the creek is going to come out over into here, and a new water delivery system, new point of delivery for 2 water rights there. And so all this will end up as a backwater estuary. So we won't have any more of this warm water. We won't have to take out any of the silt that's in here. And then we can just eliminate this sediment section that is really warming up the lower part of Loving Creek down here. When you look at the data, Loving Creek is always over the top in temperature and water quality. It's horrible. So this is the first big project that we're going to do underneath this BOR grant. And then Fish and Game, I got to tell you guys, we've hit the perfect storm on Silver Creek right now. Fish and Game has the right people in there. They want to do the right thing. They want to work on Silver Creek. Nature Conservancy has never had a better bunch of people working there than I have seen in the last 40 years. And then, of course, with the Alliance in there, we're able to start getting all this work done. I couldn't stand here in front of you guys 5 years ago and tell you that any of this was going to happen. I mean, it's going on right now, and it's really good. The Haysper Hatchery, this being one of the first projects that was done on the creek a long time ago, this is all silted back in. And it's mostly because of this up here coming down through here. Fish and Game cleaned out Gabbers Lagoon, I think it was last year. They're coming in next year because we've already got the design work done for it, and the grant is going to help with that. Fish and Game is putting in their money. So they'll do this, the pipe, and then they're going to divert the creek back down through here, come back in here, clean this up, pinch it up a little bit, and get it all cleaned out. So that's huge for Fish and Game to actually do that. So that's the second part of Loving Creek. Oops. Okay, TNC, and this is one that is really close to me because for the Alliance, we'll do the restoration anywhere, private or public land. But for me personally, I really like seeing the projects on the public land. I mean, that makes a big difference. All of Silver Creek needs help, but the public land is what we fish. So this section from the confluence up to where you can walk in right over here, it's going to get redone. Now, I don't know how many times anybody ever fished this section recently? Yeah. Sucks. I mean, literally, you try and step in it, you're gone. I mean, it's so choked up that
What's wrong with that?
I wouldn't even fish it anymore. I used to fish it all the time. I loved it. I mean, this right here, that little spot right there, it was money. But anyway, their plan in here is a lot like what they're doing on Stalker Creek. They're going to come in, narrow it, push the creek over to some of these heavier riparian areas, and then clean out everything they can. So that's another big restoration project for them. And I really am very happy to see this when the Alliance is going to kick in a bunch of money for it, because everybody gets to fish it, along with the Butte Creek one. This one here is all public. I don't know how many guys have fished that in the past. That used to be awesome. And this used to be the hidden brown drake secret spot. That was really good for brown drake, but it's not as good anymore. So those two projects are really cool because we all get to fish. Any questions on that? One of the other things too before I get to Ed. The fourth piece of the puzzle on Loving Creek is Bashaw's old property, Loving Springs Ranch. We don't have a design for it yet, but that particular section has a lot of spawning gravel and a lot of spawning area, but it has a lot of problems with where the water's delivered in there. There are diversions and there are ditches and there's all kinds of stuff going all over the place in there. So the idea is to consolidate the water. Doesn't need a lot of restoration, it just needs water put back into the natural channels. And then we'll do a lot of riparian work and fencing for the cattle in there. So that will mean that within the next 3-4 years, Loving Creek will be restored from top to bottom, all the way through it. That's a big one.
Greg, how much of the creek is artesian water?
Artesian as far as?
I understand that a lot of it just comes out of the ground.
It all is.
Is it every bit of it?
Every
Or is
bit.
it, or is it round, or is it?
No, Silver Creek is 100% spring fed.
Okay, so it's, the fish
Like
are,
that.
the fish are locked in and.
Yeah. Well, the fish can move in and out to the bottom end. You know, the Littlewood, where the brown trout decided to come from. But from the top end, no. There's no way. There's one little connection on Loving Creek, Upper Loving Creek, that we're going to work on, where there is some diverted water that goes all the way down Gannett Road, comes into a pond seasonally. It only does it in the spring, and then kind of seeps into Loving Creek. They're trying to figure out exactly how to do the water delivery in there, because a lot of this isn't just going in and saying, oh, we're going to fix this, fix that, fix the bank here, clean the creek up there. A whole lot of it is just figuring out how you're going to still deliver the water to the water users and still make it work for them without losing water in the creek, but actually increasing the flows in the creek as much as you can to keep it stable.
So where does it come from? Is it from the Wood River, or is it?
Yeah, Wood River
Goes down?
to the aquifer and then back up. So if you think of Silver Creek, you can see a reservoir like magic. You see the water come in, you see the water go out, you see the water table go up and down. Silver Creek is upside down. You just don't see the reservoir underneath you. That's where it gets complicated, is that you never really know exactly how much water is down there. I'll get to that in a minute. But that's all it is. That's why it is somewhat controllable, because it's just an upside down tailwater fishery.
Temperature is probably stable somewhat.
Yeah, it's, every spring head, we've got loggers and 12 spring heads on Silver Creek. Every single one of them goes from 47 to 51 degrees. Never changes. It's always the same, and almost always at 49 or 50 degrees, unless it dries up.
How does the water fluctuate in the spring? Like when you watch how it gets really high, is that just because the wood and all that is seeping back out?
Yeah, it's because there's a big push of water coming into the aquifer. And so when you have big water years, it's really easy to fill the aquifer. It's small. I mean, Silver Creek is not a big aquifer. Drought years, it's a real problem because it's just math. Drop in, drop out. What are you going to get? So in drought years, the big things are recharge, finding places to put water so it'll go down in the aquifer, and then extraction. How do we control pumping out of there? Years ago, IDWR, Idaho Department of Water Resources, decided, hey, you want to throw a well in, throw a well in. If your surface water right dries up, pump it out of the ground. Well, we know now it's interconnected. So you absolutely have to have control and understanding of how much water you're extracting, because you're pulling it, out at a rate that it can't sustain coming in. That's why Silver Creek, and I'll get to the slide here in a minute, has massive fluctuations in the water levels. I mean, I've seen it go from 45 CFS to 100 CFS in the span of a month. And it's mostly because of when they turn the pumps on and off. That's the biggest thing, is when the groundwater pumping changes. This is a spring that's on Grove Creek. This spring, when it's flowing, and it doesn't always flow, has has a hole about this big around. You put your hand down in there and it just pushes it back. Another funny thing about Silver Creek and the springs is that every one of them is different. There are springs that are sold in Silver Creek, they're just sand. And then there's some that are gravel, and some have small gravel, some have bigger gravel. And we think it's just because of the age of the spring. It doesn't, the water, constant water movement grinds it up into sand. And so some of these are really, really old. Most stable springs in Silver Creek are Cheney Creek, Mud Creek, and to some extent Grove Creek. When you guys drive down Pumpkin Center Road, you notice all the little springs by the side of the road? Those are really fairly stable springs. And we think also that's mostly because of the latitude of the springs. You get closer to the Timmerman Hills, a little more water to work with in there, and so they are a little bit more stable. Some of the things that the Alliance, of course, that we're always trying to do is protecting the springs as much as we can, working with the water users and the farmers and everybody to try and keep those springs recharged. So we're trying to figure out places for recharge. That gets very legal. And then the fishing platform. That was a pet project of mine that I wanted to get in there to make sure everybody could have access on the creek. So we want to see a few more of these if we can. Conservancy's planning on putting a couple. Fish and Game, I think, might want to put one in somewhere, Willows or somewhere like that, so we can have another platform for that. And then, of course, Upper Loving Creek to do the work in there, and then the buffer zones. And then, Point of Rocks. Okay, Fish and Game is going to start doing some work on that. And that's a big one. It's not really, it won't be public for a while too much yet, but it is right now. They want to do what they're going to call spot treatment in it. We all know how overwidened it is, and it does cause some problems. So some islands, some pinch point, some areas where you kind of blow the bank out, make pinch points in there, try and narrow it up, increase the velocities a little bit. Surprisingly enough, when you actually get in there and fish from the lower part of the Willows down to Point of Rocks, there's not as much sediment as you would actually think. And a lot of the sediment is really old sediment. I don't know if you guys notice or not, but sometimes you'll get Silver Creek. It seems super, super thick, hard to get out of. And then sometimes you get in and it's really loose. Well, legacy sediment's that real dense, hard stuff. And there's more of that down in here from being around for 75 years. The loose stuff is generally from having done previous projects and mixing it up and stirring it up. And so that's another project that we want to get going. I have another picture of that. Well, anyway, this picture was a picture that I took just this last January, no snow, okay? The fishery, people always ask me, why is it always going cyclic? Why it's always up and down? Climate, you get the droughts, you squeeze the spawning areas. You get the good water, more areas for fish to go and spawn. And so you can see from this how crazy the flows can get. Recently, since there's been some changes with Idaho Department of Water Resources and the growers, they're trying to stabilize flows down to Richfield and Silver Creek. So they're trying to meet target flows at one of the particular gauges down there. And the last couple of years, Silver Creek, even was it 3 years ago, 2-3 years ago, when we had the droughts, it's a lot more stable in there. And that is very, very critical to Silver Creek, is that you don't get these wild fluctuations. You get flows that come down like this, and you've got 90-degree days. What do you think happens to the water temperature? Like crazy. You've seen water temperatures down at Highway 93 hit 90 degrees in drought years. And Suzy Q, 83, 85 in there. So it can go from 60 degrees at a spring head to 80 degrees within 6-7 miles, especially when you have low flows and high air temperatures. And again, it's all about the water. Knowing what's going on, being aware of it, understanding what is going on here. Our water situation around here is critical for us. Bigwood could suffer. You start getting a lot of drought years, it's going to lose its flows, and you just got to start figuring out what to do. And so one of the big things in the conservation is that I've been pushing really hard on targeting our restoration to handle the way Silver Creek functions for low flows. So if you create a restoration project for flows that are 75 CFS, it's going to do all right. If it goes to 125 CFS, you're even better. But if you've got an over-widened stream, it doesn't function at all at 75 CFS. So the whole thing is to get these areas, restoration areas, so that they are narrow enough, can carry the flows without warming up, and still have exposed gravels and move the sediment along. And then, of course, everybody cooperating, and that's a hard one. You know, getting the growers on board. Most of our landowners on Silver Creek, fortunately, have bought their properties as playgrounds. So they are very aware of the fact that they want to keep fisheries alive. And so they're willing to certainly spend the money and work with whoever's leasing their land and their water and doing, you know, their crops and growing. So it's complicated, to say the least. Is just to get everybody on board to understand that we have a finite resource, a valuable stream to work with, because let's face it, if you just bought a piece of property on Silver Creek for $12 million and it dries up because we didn't keep a handle on the water, that's not a good scenario. So it takes an army to try to figure out what to do with it. And again, the future for the creek is understanding what it needs. It's not going to heal itself. Educating, and then funding, of course. You know, you can't. Somebody told me one time that $1 million a mile. I don't care what stream you're restoring, it's $1 million a mile. I laughed. Well, guess what? I need about $25 million. So that's about what it is, too, when you think about it. And then, you know, the restoration planning, again, making sure that when you do restoration, it's a big deal as far as how you do it. And that's where this came in. We did the Alliance and the Nature Conservancy put together this assessment report on Silver Creek that was basically a blueprint for what it's, you know, the makeup of Silver Creek, what it needed for its geomorphology, which, you know, the ratio of depth to width, velocity, and then what it needs to carry water in a way to maintain the temperatures, the spawning gravels, and how wide it needs to be in some spots. Silver Creek doesn't have cookie cutter restoration. This restoration project over here is going to be completely different than the one over here. Every place is a little bit different on it. So that has to be understood, and that's where this came in, was that it took all of Silver Creek, broke it down into sections as to where its high priority needs were, and then where it probably didn't need too much work. And stability in drought. Again, that comes back to understanding the water, how to manage recharge, groundwater pumping, and then again, the math. It just comes down to the drop in, drop out. You get a drought year, what are you going to need to help Silver Creek stay up? And then the tools that we've got coming out right now are really exciting, because groundwater model, they have been able to implement a method of understanding if you put water in this part of the aquifer, what effect will it have over here? And you get this much coming in, this much going out. And then also there's two more models that are coming out right now. One of them for Silver Creek, out of Montana State. Sam Carlson's doing it, where we will be able to forecast Silver Creek as far as its water quality and quantity, where you can look at saying, we've got this much water, it's going to be this warm, what will happen to the creek next month? Which is a pretty big deal in trying to figure out, well, what would happen if we turn these pumps off? When it gets to be 95 degrees and the creek is 50 CFS. If we turn those pumps off, what effect will it have over here? So that's huge. That's a really, really big one. This one is one of the little success stories that I threw in here that is a piece of Loving Creek that was done just last year. This was all the way from here back over here. Again, that much sediment, that much water, it got restored. 6 months, they were in there spawning. 6 months. I mean, I was shocked.
And the animals are eating
And yeah, these are all rainbows.
them. And the fish eaters.
Yeah, this was in the spring, so these are all rainbows. I mean, you can see the raw bank. You build it, they'll come. So, I mean, it's just, there were no fish in there that could spawn in any section of that creek.
Wattle there lining the bank that?
Yeah, that's a biolog.
Okay.
And so this is all new restored bank right in here. Exposed to gravels, there they are.
Now, do you bring in the gravel when you're doing the research?
Generally not.
Okay.
I mean, most of these gravels are already there, you just have to uncover them. And it's already there.
What do you do with the sediment? You
Well,
suck
that's-
it out and-
What you can do with the sediment, and what they did in this particular one, was they took the creek and put it way out in the field and diverted it. And they came in with the equipment, they pull the sediment back into here. So the old bank is over here. Okay, so the sediment got put back in here to create new wetland and just replant. And then you put in the new bank right in here. So this, the whole idea behind this was to pick up the velocity. This never flowed before they did the restoration project. So now this will always stay nice and clean. And so the trout will come in there and do all their spawning in there now, and it won't refill with sediment.
And then you remove the redirect.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, otherwise you'd have fish spawning in
Over there.
a ditch. So no, they got moved back over as soon as they finished the project. The whole thing took about, I want to say, 4 months to do it from start to finish. And I was shocked. I mean, the project got done. This next April, there they are spawning in it. So that's a good thing. Any questions?
I got one more. You spoke several times, and I've heard that term. I live in the Triangle, and the guys talk about where you're putting water back into the aquifer. Now, what does that physically look like around here? I mean, is it a holding pond? Or?
Yeah, basically, I've been a big advocate of what I guess you could call targeted recharge. Because like I said, there's some areas where you could put a pond here and it has no effect for months on the spring that might be right there. But then you could put a pond in over there and within 2 weeks, it starts filling up that spring. And that's just because of the geology of the triangle area. And so the idea is that you get a pond, you got to find the right spot for it. And if you put the excess water in the spring into it, then it'll recharge those springs in that area until you run out of the water. The water right gets shut off or you can't use it anymore. And then the only other thing you can do is to start curtailing the pumping to keep the creek stable. Because if you started, the water's gone out of the pond, then you start pumping real hard over here, then it could end up drying the spring up again. But in Silver Creek, the most critical time for the creek is usually the last week of May till about the second week of July. June is hard on Silver Creek. It's hot, the days are the longest, and the creek is the lowest, and the weeds haven't grown up. So spring can be very, very, very difficult on Silver Creek. So targeted recharge, we've been playing with it on some areas. O'Gara's old property, that's one of the biggest ones. That's where that big spring was that was bubbling and pumping. That actually happened to be right below where that pond is. And when it fills up, that spring fills up.
That's fascinating. Who would have thought? Yeah.
When you've done, once restoration is completed from the channel standpoint, do you do any active work on the banks with, vegetation, certain types of things? And then how does that affect the aquatic invertebrate counts and populations?
Well, as far as vegetation goes, it doesn't do much for you mean the stream as far as the invertebrates? They come back immediately. I mean, it was, I remember when we did the pond project, Kilpatrick and Purdy, everybody was worried about losing the invertebrates. And I get asked that question a lot, you kill off the invertebrates. No. They will come back within 2 years as strong as they were ever. The advantages of doing the restoration work, let's say, how many of you guys remember the pond before they did the project, when it was a flat mess? You had mud bugs in there and mud weeds. And so you had your calabatus, you had your damsels, and you had some midges. That was about it. And then when you did the work, all of a sudden we started getting betas, we started getting green drakes, in that pond that I'd never seen before. So you get that diversity back. And then you get, with the insects, you get drift. If you did a restoration project on this section and upstream was nice and pristine, well, you get that insect spinnerfall drift that comes down and then repopulates the area. I have always been very surprised how fast the bugs come back and the diversity of the bugs. Some of these projects, we've seen PMD hatches come back, which, is a pretty good indicator of how healthy your invertebrate populations are in the stream. PMDs are pretty sensitive to what goes on, and they require more moving water, gravels, and stuff like that. So yes, once you clean out the stream, you get a big diversity of the insects back. And it comes back quick.
Back in around 2000, 2006, you saw a huge decline in mayfly larvae and a huge increase in scuds in the creek. Joe Clark, she would do annual transects for kids. And I'm just wondering, is that scud population is a little hard, isn't it, on some of the mayfly larvae?
That's a new one on me. I've only ever noticed scuds really kind of in the upper tributaries where the water's the coldest. You go to a spring head and it's just loaded with scuds. I don't know. I mean, that's a good question. Could have been temperature driven.
This was, the trend lasted over a 5-year period of time. And it was down in the Conservancy.
That's interesting. Did scuds eat larvae? I mean, do they eat the invertebrates? I don't know. That's a good one. I'll have to find that one out. There's also been some thought too that some of our hatches, hatches are going to suffer if you have drought, if you have warm water. But there's some speculation going about ultraviolet, our global warming. I mean, everybody I think in here can say, well, the sun feels a whole lot hotter. And some people think that maybe ultraviolet light has an impact on insect populations, but they too are cyclic. I mean, guiding for 40 years drives me nuts. Some years you just go, God, look at the PMD hatches, and you come back next year, there's none. There only seems to be a few insects that are always consistent. But the scuds are a new one.
Greg, is Lawrence looking at any of the neonicotines and the type of fertilizers and stuff that all the ranchers are using? Because there's a lot of new studies and stuff out.
We haven't been too much.
Have you noticed any effects of that?
No, not really. They're all required by DEQ to not let any of that get in the creek. But one thing that is happening now is a lot more of the science on the fly, being able to go out and take spot samples of water quality, because that's something we haven't been able to really do much of. And it was anywhere reliable was a consistent method of, checking for nitrates, checking for fertilizers, and checking for that kind of water quality. The only thing we've been is dissolved oxygen and most of the temperature. So I'm excited to see what else we can do with science on the fly to get more of that. TNC's been doing some of it this year, but they haven't come out with any results.
Yeah, well, we go out and collect.
Yeah.
And we're doing it for just over a year, so at least we go a little over a year baseline.
I'd like to start doing it myself when I go out and do the loggers. Because, that's twice a year I can get a whole bunch of areas to do that. So I think we're going to end up expanding that quite a bit.
Well, let us know.
Yeah. So.
Great. What is the future? Right now you're saying the fishery is depleted. We don't. So do you just rely on just natural replenishing of fish? Is that the way it works?
Yeah.
Nothing is added. Nothing is added. So is there a way? Does it just require this restoration in order to speed this up and make this a better fishery?
Yes.
Is that
precisely what
That's,
that's the only way it's gonna work.
that and keeping water in the creek. I mean, if you tailor the restoration to handle low flow so the fish can spawn in it, that just helps overall. So, yeah, it's only
It's a
natural.
tough business, isn't it?
Yeah. Fish and Game says that Silver Creek is one of the most prolific fisheries that they've ever seen as far as natural reproduction. And some of them will even say that there's too much as far as natural reproduction. When you see the fish growth rates in Silver Creek, it's astounding. One of the projects that I tried to get going last year involved pit tagging fish and collecting, recapturing them through arrays and through hook and line. One of the things that we found that was fascinating was that we got one fish, well, actually a couple, but one in particular that we tagged in September and recaught the following July. It grew 11 inches. So Silver Creek, year one, they typically get to about 5-6 inches. And then when they go through year two, they'll go anywhere between 8 and 11 inches. And then they start to grow down in length, pick up girth. 11 inches. We were shocked at how, and we got 5 or 6 fish that ranged anywhere between 8 and 11 inches that grew their second year. So this year, I expect at Silver Creek, we're going to see the numbers will be up, the size will be down a little bit because we had some of those bigger 16, 17, 18 inch fish that will have died off this winter. But those 2-year-old fish that, were last year will fill in the bigger ones. There won't be a ton of them, but we're going to see a lot of those 12, 14 second year fish in the creek this year because we had a good water year last year.
Yeah.
So it typically lags. You get drought, well, the numbers go down, the size typically will start to go down, and then boom, you get good years, and a couple years later they really start to rebound.
Well, we gotta give this guy. This is really